Now for global business updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Abasi. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning to all our viewers. Dr. Abasi put it pretty aptly, saying that today is a very oily day. So lots of oil and gas news. But we do want to start, of course, with that ceasefire agreement for 60 days that's been announced and what, if any, impact it'll have on oil prices. So let's take a look at a joint statement put out by the U.S. and France, essentially saying that this announcement will create conditions to restore lasting calm. I heard Dr. Abati saying what we want is global peace. Lasting calm and allow residents in both countries to return safely to their homes on both sides of the blue line. The statement continues saying the United States and France will work with Israel and Lebanon to ensure this arrangement is fully implemented and enforced, and we remain determined to prevent this conflict from becoming another cycle of violence. On Netanyahu boosting, I just want to remind everyone that remember when we covered Israel planting bombs in pagers of Hezbollah agents that blew up and killed a number of them. Dr. Bati mentioned the barrage of attacks that happened recently. It really should be pointed out there that Israel beat Hezbollah into this agreement. They really did beat them into the ground. So that's the reason why you see Netanyahu, beating his chest. On the oil side, OPEC Plus, and again, I'm going to get to oil prices in a moment, but sticking with the theme, OPEC Plus actually, we understand that they are considering holding off on yet another output hike for January the 1st. So we understand that there's supposed to be a meeting online on Sunday, December the 1st, but there was a prior meeting that took place apparently yesterday between Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, Saudi Arabia Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman, and Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak. And, Iraq, Kazakhstan, I think there's one more country that have been overproducing above OPEC's, quotas, which have been adding more supply to the market. There's also issues, of course, with China, demand and so on. So that's on the demand side. But then the U.S., of course, also producing more oil than expected. So OPEC right now, it looks like they might actually hold off on adding more barrels to the market when it comes to production levels and supporting prices. If you take a look at the production charts that we have to show you who is really worried about this in terms of market share, you see Saudi Arabia there as of October the 31st of this year, 33%. You've got Iraq at 15%, Iran at 13%, UAE at 12%, and then Kuwait at 9%. And then when you group the others in, they come in second place at 18%. So this is a market share issue with respect to OPEC. So we'll see what happens in that meeting. Oil prices, as I mentioned, did tick up a bit Wednesday earlier today. Brent crude at 72.84. West Texas Intermediate still below $70 at 68.77. And as always, we put Nigeria's benchmark, which will be 75 next year. Quickly moving to Asian markets, they were mixed in trading today. Shanghai Composite Index was up by 1.3%, pretty healthy there. Hang Seng was up by 1.4, but you see the Nikkei 225 and the Kospi both down. There's still, of course, the worries over tariffs and the like to come from the U.S. Speaking of the U.S., the markets again had another, I think it's his 51st or 52nd big jump for the S&P 500 and the Dow. Thanksgiving holiday is tomorrow, so there's a big data dump. Data that's supposed to be coming out Thursday. They've compressed everything to come out today. So we're going to get a second reading on the Q3 GDP figures for the United States. The first reading was 3% growth. The U.S. again is leading the way in terms of for developed economies as far as economic growth is concerned. We're also going to get durable goods. We'll get jobless claims, the number of people who need support from government that are out of work. And then the Dr. Bati talks about this a lot, the PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditure Index. This is the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation. Expecting that later today as well. So a lot of data will be going through tomorrow. As Dr. Bati said, it's an oily day. Don't really have much to add on the Port Harcourt revamp. You three have already done justice to it, but I will shout out Ayo for being the most positive because this is about, it's about outputs, right? And I know Dr. Bati did compare the numbers to the Dangote refinery, but then that's, you're comparing an elephant and an ant here. But the more ants, the better, because this is all about adding more output. If you just remind everybody, looking at our oil production from the Q3 GDP figures that were released. If you look at where we should have an arrow where this administration came in at 1.22 million barrels per day. As of Q3 2024, Nigeria now is at 1.47. You know, the Tinubu administration wants to get us back to 2 million or more. The more production, the better, because you're able to get more crude to the Dangote refineries and the Port Harcourt refineries and the like. And we don't want scarcity. I think it was either Rufai or Dr. Bati that was or Ayo mentioning Christmas holidays. We don't want any hold up. So the more output, the better. And again, a reminder, oil sector GDP growth was part of the reason why we had, the prints that we had of 3.46 year on year. 5.17%. Contribution was 5.57. But remember, in terms of FX contribution, that is the bulk of where Nigeria gets our FX from. So that was part of the story. And then to round off the MPC, where everyone was expecting, most people were expecting 50 basis points, but it ended up being 25 basis points. All other parameters, the asymmetric corridor, the cash reserve ratios for domestic deposit money banks and merchant banks held at 50 and 16% respectively. Liquidity ratio left at 30%. The MPCs, Olayemi Cardoso, they're still very much focused on inflation. And finally, my favorite chart, the MPR versus the CPI. I promised that we would update that chart. So there's a difference. The real interest rate is still about minus 6.67 or so when you take 27.5%, which is where the MPR is as of yesterday, minus inflation of 33.88 headline CPI. So there's still a gap there, as you can see that chart in front of you. But, the work continues in trying to get inflation down in Nigeria.
Okay, I don't want to say I told you so, but I think I got it rightly. I said they were going to bump it up to 27.5. That's the number. But my fear is this, Rotus. Next February is going to make it 1 year since they've been tightening and raising rates. Inflation has not come down. They have surpassed all the inflation analysis and parameters. By now, based on their projection, inflation should be about 26 to 28% now. But we have not seen anything. So the question we should ask them is, can we try a new method? Can we try a new approach? I know, this is textbook. Once inflation goes up, you raise interest rates, to be able to cool down things and all of that. But obviously, it's showing that to a large extent, Nigeria's inflation really is a very dynamic one that they need to study empirically, like I like to say. That's one, Rotus. And number two, Rotus, I want to ask you a very pertinent question because you see a lot of confusion and convoluted narrative goes on. How much barrel did we produce in the last month? Because the NNPC it was not even the NNPC, it was Nuhu Ribadu that said we did 1.8 million barrels. And we are getting other figures that is at 1.5 plus condensate is 1.7. So where's the 1.8 that we produce? Yeah,
condensates, you're right. You mentioned condensates a lot. You're right. It's the condensates that makes that difference.
But they claimed it was 1.8 we produced. But even with condensate, the last report we're getting that this they carried, it was 1.7. So where did they get the 1.8 million barrels? I just want to know. You know me, I know no book. So I'm asking questions now, all of a sudden.
All right. So the CBN governor, Yemi Cardoso, has said yesterday when he was giving the report following the MPR meeting, the MPC meeting, that sometimes these reforms or these policies take time to translate to real change. So in terms of taming inflation numbers, before you were talking about that, he said sometimes it takes months and even a year. So perhaps he was giving that indication that give us 1 year. By February, we don't see any real change in terms of the impact. Then we can begin to reevaluate some of the policies, the monetary policies that have been that have come into place since they started earlier this year. But beyond that, a number of analysts mixed reactions. Of course, from the private sector, it's just looking at the impact of raising the hiking the rates on private businesses, on small businesses. We've been talking about that a lot. A lot has been said about we need to tame inflation, and so some of the things that would need to suffer in terms of opportunity costs would be some of those small businesses, but in the long run, they would hopefully be able to bounce back. They said that they are shocked. They're already grappling with issues around energy costs, infrastructure deficit, and now they have to deal with borrowing costs as well, higher borrowing costs. But beyond that, talking about energy costs, there's a report in Business Business Day that talks about people now substituting, using fuel wood, now using kerosene, which is unhealthy for public health and also detrimental to the environment because people cannot afford energy costs as it is right now. So just being able to reflect some of the policies and how it's affecting the everyday Nigerian, people having to cut costs. Christmas is around the corner. How are people going to survive? We know usually prices of goods and goods especially and food prices go high during Christmas. So let's see how that would play out. But they have to do what they have to do to tame inflation.
Okay, on Monday, we tried to look at what will happen during the week. One of the issues we mentioned was China. Industrial data coming in. The industrial data for China came in yesterday, but it was 10% in the third quarter. We seem to have done better than 27.1, the highest since March 2021 that was reported in September. But what is clear is that China is still grappling with low consumption and also the crisis in the housing sector. Deflation remains a problem, and that by the end of Q4, it's not likely that China or the People's Bank of China will be able to meet the target. New Zealand, where there's also slowing growth, as in Nigeria, although some people say we are growing, but if you compare to New Zealand, growth is slowing down in Nigeria. They reduced 25, they had a cut by 25 basis points. In fact, 50 basis points in terms of their interest rate. The interest rate in New Zealand is at 4.25%. It's not like Nigeria, where interest rate is almost through the roof. So when Mr. Cardoso talks about orthodoxy, as the only way, where there are other ways in other economies, but he was honest enough to say that there are other issues that should be addressed, and that I think is on the demand side. He is on the supply side. He said some of the things they've done on the supply side, but, well, he says the job of the CBN is to ensure stability of the Naira, and the Naira is stable. I question that. Is the Naira stable? He says value is dependent on other things. The one that concerns me, and I guess you and all of us on this table, is the value of that Naira. Well, if it may not be a monetary policy issue, it may be a fiscal issue. That's what government should address. Finally, Friday is Black Friday sales. A retail group which has said that nobody should trust what these retailers do. Sometimes the material may even be cheaper at other times. I know you cover Black Friday every year. I'll see what you have to say to us about Black Friday in Nigeria today, when every day is black, even worse than black. Thank you very much, Rotus.